I first started thinking about creating Living Whole online during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we could not offer our Living Whole retreats. It dawned on me that the online format had some important advantages that I'd never thought about during my years of focusing on in-person experiences. For one thing, you would be able to learn from many more of my colleagues than would be possible in any sort of in-person setting. And that might inspire you to find new things to support your health and healing journey. I have known Derek Notman for more than 25 years. I first met him when he was demonstrating gyrotonics at a health fair. I had never seen such an apparatus, and I was mesmerized by the graceful and powerful flow of his body's movement. He had me try it out while he explained to me the health benefits of this movement therapy. Then he expanded his conversation to other forms of movement and energy therapies, and I was fascinated by his way of teaching and the myriad forms of healing that I had never heard of and within which he had expertise. Derek's contributing to the first 10 Tapas for Life courses, or TLCs, as the facilitator of movement by teaching us Qigong for common health challenges. In Tapas a la carte, he offers Jin Shin Jyutsu, which is a healing art focused on energy movement. When you bring these skills into your life, you can experience a more harmonious development and balanced expression of yourself. Derek is also offering live with facilitators sessions, so you can have direct conversations with him if you wish. In this series of podcasts, you can listen to my conversations with leaders and experts in a broad range of fields encompassed within integrative whole health, which brings together the best in conventional medicine, whole plant-based food, movement of the body, and mind-body-spirit disciplines. Because of the constraints of the pandemic, we met over video conference software and did not have the benefit of a recording studio. Nonetheless, the wisdom offered by those whom I interviewed is priceless. And these podcasts focus on the relationships between the interests of each guest and the greater universe of health and healing. I hope that you enjoy all the podcasts in this series. For over 3 decades, Derek Notman has dedicated his life to the study of physical culture and philosophy. This pursuit has led him all over the world, including time living in China and Southeast Asia, studying with traditional masters of martial arts, movement, and healing. So, Derek, please continue. We're listening. So, Derek Notman, it's really wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for joining me for this podcast.
It's my pleasure. It's so great to be here.
And one of the many things I'm excited about is that you have contributed to one of our introductory videos by giving your definition of health and your definition of healing. And your definition of health really just touched my heart. What you said was health is wholeness. Health is being in harmony with what is as it is, without needing it to be different. And it just reminded me of conversations you and I have had many times over the years. You have had that philosophy ever since I met you. And we've had a period where we haven't had a whole lot of connection, but we've reconnected now during these very challenging times. And I've gotten to have an opportunity to describe to you what we've been doing in International Integrators and in Living Whole, in which we are defining the definition of integrative whole health as being the bringing together the best in conventional medicine and whole plant-based food and movement of the body, and then what we call mind, body, spirit disciplines, the ability to unite and harmonize the mind, the body, and the spirit. And I'd love for you to start by talking to us about why you see integrative whole health as being particularly helpful during these challenging times.
Great question. Well, I think, simply stated, integration is what we're all after, right? And, even with this question of what is health and what is healing, it sort of depends on what facet of the gem we're looking at, right? There's healing the body, there's healing the spirit, there's healing the emotions. Someone could have a healthy physical body, but have some mental, emotional issues. So really, to be whole is to be integrated. And, working with people over many years, you can often have somebody come in that will look to say, oh, I did this and then this created this result, or this is what fixed it. And as a practitioner, you always kind of know, well, there's many things that go into the equation that bring about a change. It's never usually reducible to one thing. And so for me, this is really where the power of dialogue and many perspectives is so magical, because I really do believe that a lot of what we're learning to do is how to hold better questions and how to stay in possibility rather than continuing to rush toward a conclusion, or to find something that feels concrete that we can say, yes, this did that. And so integrative practices really allow a person to consider themselves in the wholeness of who they are. And so I really feel that having people that have different specialties or perspectives, that they're looking at this common problem of humanity and health and happiness and healing, really enriches the dialogue. And since nobody has a monopoly on truth, it creates a possibility for a really deep communication that is not only enriching for the person involved as a participant, but also for the practitioners. And if practitioners stay curious and they stay engaged, it's just such a deepening of the medicine they have to bring. So I just love that collaborative aspect. And so I'm so delighted to be able to be reconnected with you, who really taught me about all this. So it's very special.
One of the things I've always loved about you is this concept of dialogue that you were just talking about, and the different ways, the different expertise areas that you have developed over the years that all involve dialogue in one way or another, whether you're working with your body, or you're working with your body and your hands in Jin Shin Jyutsu. Talk to us a bit about your training, the things that have really caught your attention over the years, and how that fits into this idea of dialogue and asking the questions and looking for the possibilities.
Beautiful. So, I come at all of this from a background in philosophy. That was really my first passion and study. And what I was really interested in studying philosophy in college wasn't an academic philosophy, but a more embodied and a living philosophy. And that led me towards Chinese and Eastern traditions, because it was really a place where I saw the confluence of philosophy, medicine, self-care, and all these things in living traditions that had a real coherence and depth to them. So that was really what fascinated me, and it, for me, started with the body. I was very interested in martial arts, and I was always a pretty active kid, and when I got to college, I needed something to keep doing, so I started doing a lot of training in martial arts. And because it was supportive of and influenced by philosophy, which I was studying, and it really gave me this sort of three-dimensional field to play in, where it was like moving my body, but also reading poetry and figuring out how that related to it. I was just really captivated by it, and I'm so grateful for that, even though it it's been a crazy process at times. It's just been, I've always been deeply curious and sort of onto something, meaning like I'm always trying to find the next piece of a puzzle. And for me, that's just been so useful and entertaining, right? It's like this constant deepening of things. And so from afar, my work can look like I do a lot of different things. I teach movement and different traditions, Tai Chi and Chinese martial arts. I do a lot of work with traditional Indian clubs and other forms of old physical culture. I do healing work, Jin Shin Jyutsu, which is either through self-care, where I'm sitting with people in meditation and telling them how to work on themselves, or they get on the table and I do the work directly. I also do inquiry work with people, which is sort of looking into the mental, emotional body. And so it can seem like there's a lot of things happening, but the part that fascinates me, and I say this all the time and it leaves people scratching their heads at times, is that it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm always doing the same thing, and that's listening. So all these practices are an invitation to develop one's sense of internal stillness as a base from which to listen and observe what's happening. And so when you're moving, you're listening to the quality of the movement. When you're doing Jin Shin Jyutsu, you're listening to an even more subtle quality of movement. And when you're doing inquiry, you're listening into the experience of another person, of a living organism in front of you. And so the essential through line to all of this is curiosity. To listen requires that we still ourselves and we get curious about what's out there, what we don't know. And so that mind space of not knowing is so powerful because it's true, it's actual, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen next. We don't even know what we're going to think next. So if we can stay in that space of not knowing, what's possible is just so tremendous and powerful. But as soon as we collapse back into a me that's knowing something and we go looking for it up in the mind, yeah, there's a lot of useful information there, but it's not nearly as great of a reservoir to tap into as just being open to pure intelligence arising out of emptiness.
Why is what you just described especially important right now during these challenging times that we are living in?
Great question. I'd say because there's more noise now than there's ever been. And the possibility is to be unmoved by it, to not be reactive, to not let fear pop in because of noise and movement that gets you moving internally, and then the mind tells a story and then we're moving behind that story. And so really the possibility is to put all that down and to be unmoved and to listen into the moment and to see what's here, what's really here, not what we're cognizing or reacting to or getting scared so we move against, or, there's so many reasons when we look out there to find problems with what's going on. And that's exhausting. And it's a movement away from what's here. And so I really believe that we are at a time right now where the way that things can move forward is through individuals awakening. And I think the possibility to wake up is greater now than it's ever been. It's like in the darkness, the light shines even brighter. And I don't believe we're going to solve these things through overt actions like politics and all this. And I don't want to get into that. That's a part of it. But my larger point would be that if each individual wakes up to their true nature, they'll be less inclined to do bad things in the world. And so the possibility always starts with us. And so this is what we can control. And the only way we can control it is by letting go of this need to try and control the world out there, by putting it down and being honest about what's here right now.
That's especially challenging for people, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And part of it is because we're conditioned to go into action, to move, to want to do something about it. The problem is, historically, if we look back, that doesn't seem to create good results. It's like every time we imagine we're going to go into our head and come up with an answer to a situation, it doesn't usually work out that way. Mm-hmm. But because it feels correct, we'll do it. And this is the part that gets so fascinating to me. That's the same as a physical body. If somebody's used to having their shoulders like this all the time, they'll reconstitute that shape even after the pressure's been released through massage or bodywork because it feels normal to them, even though it's clearly destructive. It's not until the individual recognizes themselves in the act of doing the thing that there's a possibility for freedom. So it's the same. We have to recognize the way we have these subconscious movements toward trying to take control or framing reality in a way that feels safe or normal or real to us, and see the possibilities to not recreate that. Just like tensions in activity, you don't have to recreate this. You can get free of it by seeing it. And so the way out is to recognize the conditions that are creating the prison or creating the problem, and to stop feeding into them.
To make a different choice.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's not easy, but it is simple. And the process is just like with training the body. You have to see yourself do the wrong thing. And when I say wrong thing, the less desirable choice. If you want to be free, but every time you reconstitute an energy of trying to be in control, they're at odds with each other. You can't be free and be in control. So if the control is what you choose over and over and it's leading to suffering, the only possibility is to choose something different. And this comes from being clear on how we choose the other thing. How do you do it? What is it that you're actually doing that's creating these results? And so, yeah, it really isn't easy by any means, but it's not complex. And this is, I think, one of the biggest problems, is that the mind wants to make everything complicated. It couldn't possibly be this simple. Yet, if you look back through all religions and all spiritual teachings in the world, there is a commonality around stillness and silence and letting go and recognizing that as long as there's a me trying to be in control of the world, there'll be suffering because it's bigger than me. And that's the source of the suffering. So there's an invitation to begin to explore some of these things. So they're not just theories or ideas, but they become experiences. And this is why the Buddha said, don't believe anything I say, try it. And this is true for all of us. The possibility to realize that we're always held in profound stillness and silence is there for all of us. It's not unique to some, but we have to see through the layers that obscure that truth.
So you were talking earlier about how this can be a really familiar position for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And through the work that you do, you help somebody learn, actually, this could be familiar for you too. What if the familiar attitude is the attitude of I suffer? How do we get to that?
So if that's someone's default, this is where inquiry is so useful. What's that like? How do you suffer? Where is the suffering? Is it in the physical body? If so, tell me about it. Is it in the emotional body? When we look at things, when we actually begin to poke at an idea that's been a placeholder, in other words, we throw out words all the time that don't have any meaning behind it. Look at what's going on collectively around things like democracy and all these things, right? These words become empty after a while. So it's very possible that we can have a story about ourselves that is full of empty words. And when we poke at those words, when we get to what they're supposed to be representing, we might find something different. And in doing that, there's a freedom, there's a possibility that can be recognized, that we have a tendency to reconstitute our experience in a way that feels familiar to us. So until we see ourselves in the act of telling ourselves that story and recognizing, oh, I just assume I know what that word means. But if we really start to ask with genuine curiosity, what do you mean by that? Or even ask ourselves, what do I mean by that? Then we can see through it. And so that possibility of seeing through, lifting veils, dropping in deeper is really what it's about, is this invitation to recognize that the mind is always in the past and it's always moving away. And so it's not that the mind isn't useful, it's just that it's not the entirety of the story. And when we're totally identified with our mind, we're really in a vulnerable situation because nobody knows where the mind's going to go next. And in a lot of ways, what the mind likes is to make things problematic or to make things scary. It's kind of what it does. And when you recognize that all of this is you talking to yourself, all these mental projections are coming out of emptiness, consisting of empty words that fall back into emptiness, there's a good reason to be suspicious about it and curious, whose voice is making me suffer?
Suspicious and curious sounds like it's going to lead you down the path of vulnerability, Derek.
Beautiful.
What do people do when you start leading them down the vulnerability path?
Such a great question. Yeah, it's so beautiful, right? Yeah, vulnerability. That's right. And this is necessary. To be vulnerable is to be open. So if what we want is to have a new experience, but we're unwilling to experience certain things, it's by experiencing them that we have a new experience. Sorry, it's a little too many experiences there. But so I love vulnerability because it's such a great space for me to work in because it's terrifying for me to feel vulnerable. It's not how I grew up. It's like so many things, and it's taken me a lot of work to actually really be able to be in that space. And what I find, and I don't know what it's like for you, but vulnerability at first has this quality of like, I want to run from it. It's like, get me out of here. But if I stay with that, if I welcome that in, it shifts. And all of a sudden, it's not a problem. It's only a problem when we react away from it. And so the possibility, just like with the shoulders, is to, yeah, I can stay with this. I don't have to come back up here. This feels safe, this doesn't. But what if the point is to explore what doesn't feel safe in the moment? Because we always move away from it. And in the moving away from that, we never process it. And so it's like the pea under the mattress. It keeps following us around until we sit with it. So vulnerability, fear, discomfort, these are all such good signs because it means you're near something that's real. You're not just in your head about it. There's a validation at your organismic level that something's here. And so then the possibility is to really look at it, to be with it. What is here? What's that like? What if I don't run from it? What if I invite that in and feel into it? And you don't have to dive in head first. You can do a little toe at a time in the water, but to be unmoved. This is the Buddha, the one who stayed. Mara tried to distract him with armies and demons and all the rest of it, but the Buddha stayed true. He didn't run. He didn't move away from unpleasant sensation and unpleasant mental projections and all the rest of it. And so that's really the invitation of that story, is what would it be like to stay, to be untouched?
Often these days, I see people moving away from unpleasant sensation by going into distraction or anesthesia. And
Yeah.
there's plenty of those things around to pull us in.
Yeah.
How do we avoid those temptations and move along the path that you're talking about, the path of awareness and the path of vulnerability, when it's so much more readily available and easier to go into distraction or anesthesia?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, none of those things are inherently satisfying. And so you get to the end of playing that game ultimately. And that can look a lot of different ways. Some people smash into walls through that, and some people subtly wake up to, it's not really taking me where I want it to go. So the possibility is in seeing something deeper. Desires being met is not satisfying, right? There's always a new desire that pops up. So, you know, in a sense, there's a game of ego strengthening that we all play. Oh, I want a better belief system, a better paradigm, a better way of doing things, a better house, a better body, a better yada yada. We want to trade up or upgrade our experience. But it doesn't matter, because no matter how far you go, you're still the dog that catches the bus ultimately, right? It's like there's still a you that shows up, and then the suffering begins all over again, just in a different set of circumstances. So when that becomes clear, which that's different for everyone, then the possibility is to seek something that doesn't come and go, to seek a type of non-contingent joy or satisfaction. And it's not even about seeking it, it's actually what's uncovered in learning to be vulnerable and in learning to stay. Because it's our true nature, right? There's awareness arising out of emptiness generated by love, would be sort of a traditional way of looking at it. Love, which, you know, philosophically you could argue is the energy that drives the universe. If there is a creator, it's doing this for its own joy and benefit, right? So that love is the infusing quality of all things when they're not looking out beyond themselves into illusion, you know, things that come and go. And so this is where it all becomes spiritual. And it's important to realize that spirituality shouldn't be theoretical, right? This is all applicable. And this is really what the Buddha was pointing out. But satisfaction will never be found in things that come and go. And all phenomena, all things that appear in the world are transient. They all come and go. So even if you could identify the best thing out there to have, once you got it, it would begin to dissipate, right? It's the nature of our experience in that domain. And then the question becomes, who is having this experience? If there's nothing out there that I can find that's going to be satisfying, what if I invert my gaze? What if instead of looking out there, I look in here? Because there's always two. There's always looking out or looking in. And this is why all spiritual teachings are an inversion of reality. When Lao Tzu wrote down the Tao Te Ching and he left the kingdom, he rode backwards on an ox going west, which means, you know, the natural progression is east to west. Everybody's following this path. He was looking in the opposite direction. There's all kinds of great little hidden or, you know, symbolic pointers in all these traditions. And this is why we can never find what we're looking for out there. And until we invert our vision and bring it back here and go inward and see what's here that doesn't come and go, what's here that stays, when we get grounded in that, there's a stability that begins to happen. In the inflation-deflation cycle that happens out there, that's natural. Oh, something good happens. I feel really good. Something bad. I feel really bad. This never ends unless you step outside of it. And then who's the one feeling good and who's the one feeling bad? And this is where the whole ontological piece of who am I? What am I? These are questions people hear, come on, get out. I don't have time for this. It's annoying. I'm Joe Smith. I'm da-da-da. But biography is not the same as identity. And if we don't have the willingness to look into these questions, we just live in a trance. The questioning is a way of getting out of the trance and opening up to a different possibility. And it's important to realize that, I've spent 30 years involved in mystery schools, and by a mystery school, I don't mean it's a secret we won't tell you. I mean, I don't know. If you had asked me in my early 20s about Tai Chi, I could have told you, I know it's this and that because I read a lot of books and I wanted to be knowledgeable about it and da-da-da. 30 years into it, it always eludes me. Every day's practice is looking a little deeper into something I don't understand. Now, I understand it, but I also understand that there is no understanding it. It's not a thing that you can put on the table and have people poke at and understand. It's a embodied philosophy that's constantly deepening and changing as you deepen and change by virtue of participating in the practice. So you never arrive. It's this movement toward a deeper and deeper sense of harmony, which is born out of stillness and silence. And so it's a holding the question rather than a receiving the answer.
Oftentimes when people are thinking about engaging in a program like Living Whole, they're looking for some kind of answers because they've got some kind of challenge in their lives. Many times they've gone through the conventional medicine system because they've had some kind of diagnosis made or they've had an illness and they are looking for something in addition to that. So when they come to us and we say to them, there are no answers, what happens next?
Yeah, and so here's where it's also important to see that there's layers to this, right? If somebody comes in with an injury, they don't want you talking about how, they're not their body, right? It's not useful. So there's things we want to fix and we can work with the body to heal the body, right? There's these levels of things. But then there's this larger container in which to hold it. Because a lot of times how we're showing up isn't insignificant to what we're experiencing. And so when we learn to show up differently, the conditions that are creating the arisal of certain things are changed. And so my fundamental meat and potatoes aspect of things is that I believe unprocessed tension and stress is the rusting of the human body, human organism, if you will. And so in learning to more deeply relax, we learn to release the conditions that create a lot of our suffering. Because tension is an activity. And if we have internal tightness that we're not aware of and we can't let it down, that's blocking our circulation, it's constricting our breath, it's keeping us in our head, which is creating all our chemistry. So it's all a series of interrelated conditions. And so, yes, treat what's treatable in the context that it's treatable, but hold it in this larger, at least for me, in this larger context where it's like, yeah, if somebody comes in and they have something going on in their arm, oh, beautiful. We can hold our 19s, we can work on our 3s, there's some exercises we can do, go see somebody else who's, an orthopedist or somebody else who has an opinion on this. But don't forget that it's not, okay, I fixed this, because as I know you can get people that are coming in and it's like, well, there's this going on and then it's this, and you get into this laundry list of issues and things that can almost be a diversion. Is there peace? Is there satisfaction? It's like Mary Burmeister would say, the woman who brought Jin Shin Jyutsu to America, when people would want all these questions about the breath, she'd say, well, smile first, because if you can't smile, breath isn't worth it. It's like, what's our experience? It shouldn't just be trying to survive, trying to not be sick. There's a possibility of thriving and opening up. So to me, the philosophical piece is really important, because how we view things determines how we relate to them, and how we relate to them determines what we'll get from them. I mean, I see this in physical practice all the time, that the way somebody thinks about their practice totally determines what's possible for them to receive from it. And so it's really important to question how we're holding a situation if we want to see transformation of that situation.
What are you thinking of sharing in Living Whole in terms of programs that you will record and programs that you will offer in person?
Yes. So I think I will record some Qigong and movement lessons. I have sort of a whole methodology for unlocking the body in the way that I see it as being designed. And so this has a lot to do with releasing the lower back and really learning to ferret out tension. I'm a believer that one of the single greatest things we can learn to do for ourselves is to develop our feeling awareness, to learn to suffuse the body with our mind in a sense that we can identify the areas that are tight and we're holding on to, so we can release those. In releasing, we empty. In emptying, we fill. So one of my favorite quotes is, I read it as coming from the Aramaic teachings of Jesus. And Aramaic was the language he originally spoke. And the expression is, blessed are he or she who can soften the rigidity within, for they gain access to the healing powers of nature. And I just think that's true. Like, the tighter we are, the more uncomfortable we are, the more constriction in the system. Simple, but not easy, because it means we have to learn to see ourselves. We have to learn to feel ourselves. We have to learn to question ourselves. So it's, again, this inversion of attention. But in doing this, there's such a calming and a capability that gets developed, where the possibility of integrating mind and body becomes really acute. So it's like we can really learn to lead the body through the feeling awareness. And so this is a constant reading of the conditions of something as it's happening. It's almost like sailing a boat or something. The mind is moving through the body, and as I'm moving, I'm sensing, is there tension, is there constriction? And if there is, just by bringing it into my awareness, it gets transformed. Because there is this intelligence in the body that knows how to heal itself. It knows how to digest your food. It knows how to keep the heart rhythm and all these things. So if we can provide it with the opportunity to do its thing by freeing up a little mental space from projecting this or projecting that and coming back into listening, we really create this opportunity. So everything I do is around that. So I'll do some Qigong classes, maybe some Tai Chi, maybe some Jin Shin self-care. And then inquiry with folks. This would be more of a live thing where we're sitting and looking into things, asking questions around the four bodies, the situational body, physical body, mental body, emotional body, and just really learning how to inquire into our own experience. And, this to me is the heart of the scientific method. Inquiry, not knowing. Science wasn't always so sure of itself. It had a very humble beginning of asking good questions that came out of philosophy. And science is beautiful at showing the how, but it doesn't tend to the why. And so this is where spirituality and science overlap, is that purpose matters. And so, a lot of these practices require that we soften ourselves and we quiet ourselves. And when we do that, something else shows up. There's a new possibility besides the normal viewpoint, because we changed the conditions.
Well, having taken some in-person classes with you in the past in these areas, and now being many thousands of miles away from each other and not being able to do that, I'm super excited that you're going to be doing some of these recordings so that I can reconnect with you in that way.
It's so great to hear, yes.
And also the live ones. It's going to be really exciting to do this work together.
I'm very happy.
Why are you excited to be part of Living Whole?
Well, I mean, simple. I'm delighted to be reconnected with you and working together again. That was always such a wonderful experience. And I just think this is so important now. I mean, I really feel like community and good information. There's so much bad information out there, and to have a space where people can have an actual dialogue without everybody in their own silo trying to promote their own theory. You know, I mean, I know, and you're such a beautiful illustration of this, that after a certain point, you just become curious. You know, it's not like people arguing for their specialty or their technology or their way they see it. You know, like after a while, you just want to help people stop suffering, and whatever works. And then there's a humility and a mystery around it. So I'm just so excited to be able to connect with a community of people that are coming from that place. And it's just been so enriching for me to be able to engage in those kind of conversations. And I'm really just thrilled to see that you've created this, and I know just by virtue of your integrity and what you bring to it, that it's going to be a wonderful project.
Thank you. Those words mean a lot to me. And when you recorded your definition of healing, you spoke to some of these things that you're talking about, where healing is learning to recognize the harmony in what is, and learning to surrender to the fact that things are not different than they are. And the situation that we find ourselves in these days, where there are so many things for us to get scared about and to get worried about and to have affect our day-to-day lives, impacts that description of the healing process. And so I love that you're offering to the Living Whole community both ways of learning how to move into that awareness physically, and also learning how to do self-care, Jin Shin Jyutsu. I think it's a beautiful thing to be adding to what we're creating. We're
beautiful.
bringing forward in the world.
Yeah, self-care is so important. I mean, it's just such a useful and necessary thing to feel empowered with very simple ways to work with yourself. And you know, to me, simplicity is clear. And so it's like when we give ourselves to the practice, and if the practice is true, it's not going to require a lot of going into your head about it. It's going to require, in fact, the opposite, which is, what would it be like if you could literally just hold your thumb lovingly and bring some clarity and calmness by grounding yourself? And the possibility is to try it and to notice and to be curious about it. And just in that willingness and curiosity, you've inverted things.
As I've worked with people who've gotten sick with COVID, one of the things that I ask them to do is to learn the finger holds. So why would we have somebody hold their thumb, like you just said?
Well, the thumb is the band leader for the hand. so it will bring all the depths into harmony. The thumb relates to the stomach and spleen function energy, and the attitude when it's out of balance is worry. So if you're feeling worried or preoccupied with something, you can hold the thumb. The thumb is the earth element, so it grounds us. And it also is, it's the earth element, so it's grounding. It's stomach and spleen, which makes up the first depth of the body, the superficial skin. So in holding the fingers, and because they're the terminal points, the fingers and toes, if you look at the mapping of the brain for the amount of sensory inputs, the hands, the feet, the face, the genitals are disproportionate. And so by working with the hands, not only is it the energy flows, but it gives a lot of feedback to the brains. We're creative creatures, so our hands are very important. So really what we're doing is helping to facilitate the circulation in the body. So lovingly holding the thumb is a way of beginning to send some energy into the stomach and spleen function. It's one of those things that sounds a little strange at first. I remember when I first encountered it, I didn't get it. But if you actually do it and you lovingly hold the thumb like you're giving a good handshake or a hug or something, and you let yourself quiet, you may notice something. And if you get curious about that and stay with that, this becomes a very useful, very simple biofeedback. It's like, okay, anytime I need to gather myself, I can ground out by holding my thumb. And then all the other fingers have similar stories and relationships. But Jin Shin Jyutsu, I think health is a function of circulation, whether it's a human body, an economy, or a roadway. If things aren't circulating, it's problematic. So tension blocks circulation. Too much thinking blocks circulation because the energy goes outside. So in settling into the body and being quiet and relaxing, we're creating the conditions for circulation. And really it's about release. To let go, which is what's the instruction in almost every religion, to let go, is to release. When you let something go, you release it. It falls down in the field of gravity. With the body, when we release, everything settles down. This is in Chinese, they say, when the qi descends, the 100 diseases are vanquished. Because when we're tight, energy starts to bottleneck up, and it creates mischief. So if everything can relax and settle, the body's much more able to tend to itself, to maintain its balance. So lovingly holding fingers is a way to help promote circulation within the organs.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share in this conversation?
No, just that I'm delighted to be a part of this and look forward to meeting other folks and sharing this. And really, I guess what I'd say is that there is an opportunity to let go of complexity and needing to know and trying to figure it out and control and all these things. And what would it be like to just simply take a moment and settle in, to be still, to be quiet, and to notice how that feels? Because there's a difference between being busy and doing it and being relaxed. And that state is conducive to healing. And if we stay in a state that doesn't allow for the conditions to happen, the healing conditions, it's not putting us in the space we want to be in. And so, simply stated, be curious about it. What is it like to drop in below all this mental activity and to soften and still the body? Because it's there for everyone. Everyone knows this. Everyone's had this experience. It's a question of having a chaotic life with moments of peace switch to a peaceful life with maybe moments of chaos. It's like foreground, background distinction.
It's interesting to hear you talk about softening when I've seen you in action in martial arts.
Mm.
How do you help somebody like me who knows very little about martial arts understand how softening is an important aspect of something that looks like it takes so much strength and power and forcefulness?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really interesting paradox. So the idea is, because we're dealing with things in the phenomenal world, they always have their opposites. Hard is defined by soft, and vice versa. So part of the idea in the traditions that I've practiced, one in particular, is that you are strengthening and developing the body so that you can release it. And one of the ways that you can think about this, and this, what I'm about to say, can be applied at a variety of levels, and it's counterintuitive, but you can't stretch muscles. You can contract muscles and shorten them, but you can't really stretch them, right? They're the length that they are. And so most of the time we're sending a signal to tighten and contract the muscle all the time. So we think, oh, I need to stretch and then I'll be comfortable. But really, if you want to change that, you take a muscle that's tight and you tighten it even more. And then the brain says, whoa, I'm holding this too tight. And then when you release, the possibility is to get a full release. Won't usually happen right away. But it's like in the Tao Te Ching, it says, if you would make a crooked man straight, you must first make him more crooked. Because it's like only when you... So for instance, we're talking about the shoulders being up here. If you were to then put somebody's shoulders down here, they would feel like really uncomfortable because they're used to this. So if you take these shoulders and you bring them up even higher, then their brain says, well, this is weird, my shoulders are too high, and it wants to relax them. Versus this, where it says, oh, my shoulders are too low, and it wants to pull them back up. So you can arrive at one thing by going in seemingly the opposite direction. And so the point of all the practice and the binding of the body, and this is really, in my opinion, what yoga was meant to be, is this idea to yoke is to bind, and to bind is to free. Because you have this possibility of, in gathering the body, when you let it go, it really lets go. It knows the distinction between closed and open versus this sort of muddied halfway in between state. And so, yeah, the purpose of all these arts is to create a soft, supple body. It's not about muscle and localized strength. It's actually about the ability to distribute force evenly across the whole frame of the body. The way a drum is even across the frame of the drum, the skin is pulled. So in doing that, you're learning to receive and release force through the body rather than holding on to it locally. In the same way that a sail is able to be stretched by the wind and create power, the tissues get stretched and released. And so, again, this is also part of helping to create circulation. So really these traditions are about body transformation. This is what, not to get too martial art nerdy on you, but like a lot of people imagine they're going to learn something in martial arts intellectual. Like I'll know how to do something. But it's, in my experience, what happens is your body changes. And then you can do all these things, and they're really easy because you can do them. Your body has been transformed. It's not intellectual. If you're balanced and strong and supple and fast and alert, those are all useful aspects for engaging in combat or what have you, So it's like you're really just creating the conditions, and they can be used all kinds of ways. I personally, for me, my training is about improving my circulation so that when I'm doing my work, it's better. I'm a better battery, because if I'm a strong battery, then the work transmits. And so this is how all these arts wind up becoming somewhat mystical, is that you realize, oh, it's about listening, and oh, it's about the mind. It's about my ability to have a thought and have my body take the shape of that thought, and then I can let it go and change into another one and another one. And so it's a feeling of like you're steering a process. You're not the one doing it. think I've gotten a little off topic of your question, but basically the strengthening leads to a possibility of softness. It's
and of listening. I'm so glad that you're bringing listening into this conversation, because there are a lot of listening themes in Living Whole that have already been recorded. We have a lot of musicians in the program, and some of them actually talk about how we've lost, in their opinion, we've lost our ability to really listen to music, because music is everywhere and it's used in so many different ways. We've lost the ability to really just sit and listen. And so we have some classes on that, and we have some artists who are talking about how to listen to painting, how to listen to something that you're looking at. And now here you are talking about listening to moving into softness, moving into curiosity.
Yeah, that's right. Jin Shin, we would say, look until you hear, listen until you see. So it's like there's this awareness that develops when there's silence. And that is the listening skill. It's like in movement, if you want to move well, you need to be able to be still and stable, because the stillness that I have in my body of what's not moving gives me the place from which to observe what is moving and have clear contrast. If there's no space to observe it from, it's all muddied. So this is why this distinction between yin and yang, as we call it in Tai Chi, that's all it is tracking this relationship between opposites. And so the stiller you are, the better the quality of your movement will be, because it's clear. It's not muddied. And so, it's beautiful. It's like there are this one ability of listening is so powerful, because the only way to listen properly is for you to not be there. It's not me listening to you. It's just listening. It's like being in the woods and thinking you see an animal. You get really quiet and you wait. And that's a state of open awareness. You don't know what you're looking at or listening to. So the possibility for a clear impression is there. But if I'm there and I'm listening, I think it was a deer over there, all that mental talk gets in the way of receiving what's actually trying to show up in that moment.
That's another thing that we have in Living Whole. There's a gentleman in Boston who is fascinated by the wildlife around his house, and so he's strapped a motion detector camera to a tree. And every month he makes a video for us of which animals went by and triggered the motion detector. So it's like what you're describing, the motion detector camera is listening until some motion causes it to wake up and record whoever's coming by. And there's all kinds of amazing wildlife that come by. Doing it every month for a year in New England means you get to see the seasons change, you get to see how the animals look in different seasons. It's another example of listening.
Beautiful, that's a neat project. It's there's so much happening, and if we can listen without being reactive, then there's freedom, then there's choice. And I think what we all want is to live at choice, right? We don't have to chase that squirrel. You don't have to get entangled with things as they arise just because they're arising. This is, one of my favorite quotes is from Eli Jackson Bear, where he says, "To be untouched is not to be separate." To be unmoved, to be untouched. He also says, "Nothing is certain. Everything else comes and goes.
Part of the whole.
Things arise, things fall away, but what are they arising and falling before?
Mm-hmm. This has been an absolutely delicious hour. Thank you.
It's so fun